We're approaching the final fireside chat of the day, and in the spirit of sort of looking at the past, some elements of the present, and the future, we decided to bring some futurists together to talk about the future of cybersecurity and its implications and environs. Now, one of the interesting, ironic aspects of this is that the better futurists have been around for a while and are elements of the past. So,
thank you so much.
How polite.
So
I feel better already.
I'm not saying we're out of date or we're necessarily obsolete, but we've lived much of what has happened in the preceding decades, contributed to some of it, and have some pretty good ideas of where we're going next. The three speakers, I'll ask them in a moment to, actually I'll ask them now. Say a few words about yourself and what your background is to be able to project in the future, and then I'll start the conversation otherwise. So, John?
I'm experienced with AV. I was in the AV club. Okay, there we go. So can you hear me okay? All right. I was a nuclear physicist in the early 90s at Los Alamos, and had an opportunity to move over and start one of the first security programs for the theoretical division there in 1996. And firewalls were a new thing. I was able to call up the person in charge of DNS for the lab, and he would give me a vanity DNS so that I could get somebody from another university to get to my desktop. So when I took on a security role, it was really a learning experience to think about all of the threat vectors and the bad actors out there. And we were definitely starting out. I don't go back into the earlier decades, but that's when I started. And after that, I had my own company. I was at a large ag company that might have had somebody speaking on Monday here, and for about 18 years. And in the process have sort of gotten the practitioner view of things. I've done a lot to develop conferences and work with people in the industry and try to raise the bar for our industry. So just have a very broad view and really enjoy the opportunity to be here.
So it occurs to me, just before Mark speaks, we have another thread that connects all three, is your work at National Labs, Department of Energy National Labs. So, Mark?
Well, I learned programming as a hobbyist in the 60s. I started making money for this stuff in 1975. I worked for the Air Force as a computer maintenance man, learned the hardware that way. And then I ended up getting into security in a big way. In the mid-'80s, I did a consulting project where we rewrote the core security for the Louvre and the Uffizi, controlling all the vaults in the Louvre and all that kind of stuff. So we had to secure the network and the physical plant. And then Sun Microsystems, I was the security coordinator responsible for all the patches, all the security product problems. Took over the network a few years later after that. And then I spent 9 years as the head of cybersecurity for Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, of course the big nuclear weapons laboratory out in California. And then I left there, I was 3 years, I was the head of security for NASDAQ, the largest stock market company in the world, and defended that place. So I've been in government, I've been in industry, and had startups and everything. So I've kind of seen it from all the different angles, and really hoping to learn how to do this someday.
Now, Gene, I thought you included me because you wanted the spook of cybersecurity yet to come on the panel.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
But more seriously, I started in cybersecurity in '88. I had planned to be a vet. I changed my major to computer science because I'm enjoying it more. The Morris worm came in and whacked my system. It was very irritated. And so I changed my focus. I spent much of the next decade and a few years at University of Idaho launched one of the first 7, so I was one of the first leaders of the first 7 centers of academic excellence, had one of the first 4 investments in RUs there, so was really involved in some of the pre-work that went into those things like the cyber competitions and so on with staff and others. At that point, I was the kid of the group instead of one of the gray-haired ones, but it was very fun. Also, launched a company. It was intended to do collaborative, cooperative cybersecurity because the observation was that attacks on one set of organizations tend to affect the others. That was in the late 90s. I sketched that out, and then we could not sell all of that in the startup company, so we whittled it down to just gathering information and sharing it collaboratively within a bank. And that was the small segment, but it was really aimed at something much broader collaboratively. I hadn't taken a sabbatical, and so when I got a call from Pacific Northwest to come and spend some time with them as their chief scientist for cybersecurity, I went and did that. They at the time did not have a research program in that area, and so we launched one. It was called the Information Infrastructure Integrity Initiative. So we were focused on the integrity of systems. We were looking at electric grid and so on. That was before that was really cool. That was around 2004, so about 7 years there. Then got an email that I thought was a prank email from someone who claimed to be the head of research at the National Security Agency. Turned out it was not. He wanted me to come out and be his deputy. Long story short, came out, interviewed, loved the place, played coy for a bit. They hired me the next week. It didn't take very long to decide I wanted to come. I spent 2 years as the deputy for research. I then had we do diversity tours there because it's not a good idea to just do one thing all the time. And so my diversity tour, they gave me ADET, which was our education and training program, so I ran all of that for the agency for about a year. I launched the Cyber College while I was there, so the hard work's been done by Steve Fountain. But I launched it with no billets and with no designation, because I discovered you could do that. I just said, let's call it the incipient Cyber College, so we called it that for about 6 months or 7 months so I could get the paperwork to catch up with the reality. Then I left when Mike retired and went back to research. I've been there 3 years. So now I guess my claim to looking at the future is I'm supposed to make sure the National Security Agency invests in the right kind of long-term research, both basic and applied. I like to call it mission-oriented, so that we get ahead, stay ahead, and remain effective against the adversary regardless of what they're doing in all of our spheres of mission. So the signals intelligence mission, what we used to call IA and now cybersecurity, and then also our support for the command.
So all of us have experience in positions where we've had to anticipate the future, where decisions that we have made have real consequences, because if we predict incorrectly, things don't go well for whoever we're working for, or whatever field we're particularly in. And some small consequences, some potentially large. So we have that experience, and that doesn't necessarily make us experts, but it has stood the test of time, I think, that we've gotten to this point. So looking at the future, I asked each of the panelists to give me some, for this conversation, to give me some thoughts about some questions and ideas to share. And the one that really struck me was a quote from Bill Gates, who's not up here at the table, but John quoted him, said that most people overestimate the development, the progress for the next 2 years, and they underestimate the change for the next 10 years. And doing either is perilous. And that really sort of gets to the heart of this. Our field changes so rapidly in the near term, we have sort of some idea what's coming, although we may overestimate. So there are things like quantum computing that we're probably overestimating its impact in terms of the next 2 years. Blockchain, we're probably overestimating in the next 2 years. But there are going to be developments over the next decade that are undoubtedly going to shake the things that we do overall. So I wanted to start the conversation. Each of you gave me a list of things. What 1 or 2 technological developments do you think 10 years from now, when we're holding this event, we're going to look back and go, wow, that was unexpected? Anyone, whoever wants to start.
I got one. Is my audio okay? Everybody hear me all right? I think something that's going to kind of hit us unexpected, it's not exactly technical, but I think we're bound to see the emergence of new cyber superpowers. I did a study for the Council of Foreign Relations a few years ago, and I tried to anticipate what kind of a country, what assets would a country have to have, and what attributes would they have to have if they set themselves a goal of becoming a cyber superpower? How many years would it take? And basically, I'll tell you what the conclusion was, that all it takes is a couple buildings full of experts and a government that's tightly controlled and good bandwidth. I don't see why, I took a look, I used the CIA World Book, and I took a look at 100 different countries and tried to sieve them and figured out which ones I thought were good candidates. Kazakhstan ended up near the top of the list. But several of the former Soviet Socialist republics have, for historical reasons, have very, very strong bandwidth going through the country, very strong pipelines. And of course, they've got reservoirs of deep talent left over from the Soviet Union and so forth. So I think those guys, Cuba, interestingly, ended up on the list as well. But those are the components. You can do your own homework.
Did Iran show up on the list?
No, but they've got what it takes. I was looking for smaller countries that could just kind of boost themselves onto the stage. I think Iran, North Korea, and Israel, and U.S., France, China, those are all the big players now. But any of these others, it doesn't take that much money. You just get yourself a couple of buildings with really good pipelines in them, and then 50 people, 80 people, something like that, and good control of the legal system and a willingness to overlook international norms, and you got yourself a superpower.
Almost describes what we have here at CERIAS.
Yeah, there you go.
I think that, today we have a tendency to look at the future through the lens of the past. And in some ways that serves us in the short term. But when we start to look at decades, I'm concerned that there will be paradigm shifts and there will be technology that advances not linearly, not exponentially, but with the hockey stick model. And all of a sudden it takes off and we have unexpected consequences, as well as the technologies that we don't know about yet. So I think that we need to be adept at adapting our thoughts when we're faced with these new technologies and be able to respond to them quickly, because the window to respond when attackers have new exploits, new technology, when something new comes along, it's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller as we introduce AI and automation.
So I'll agree with what they both said and amplify a bit. With regard to superpower, I do think that that's a likelihood that we are defining superpower in a way that won't serve us well in cyberspace. As we tend to think superpower, supernation, and in fact, when you think through, you mentioned it jokingly, a place like this that has great talent and has stability has quite a bit of what's needed. It doesn't necessarily have to have a recognized government to be powerful. So that I think we need to bear in mind. It doesn't necessarily have to be centralized. It might be more distributed. So in thinking through adversaries and collaborators in the future, we need to consider those things that are highly distributed as well as those that are more traditional. In terms of thinking through the lens of the future through the way of the past, it's so hard not to do that, isn't it? But it's absolutely right. We love to fight the last war. You hear this all the time. I heard it even today. So when we talked about how we're going to protect things, we still tend to make, maybe those of us who've been around longer make this set of word choice more often than others. We still tend to make this assumption that we can control and contain, and that we can set a perimeter and even define that perimeter. Things are so fluid now. The computational power of things like my Fitbit, things like earrings I could buy, those are all potential. Internet of Things, Internet of Everything, it's just everything now. Most people don't consider those as entities, and so our ability to contain and control and put in policies has got to shift. Our thought process has to shift in thinking at things within an area and a space for a time. The ownership is different, and so that I think is going to require major change. As well, those that are engaged, I've said this before in talks, cyberspace is a battlefield and it's also a children's playground. And our ability to manage both of those at the same time is going to be critical for the quality of life that we want. We don't want to give up one for the other. And so how do we weave that into our computation when we think about making things safer, more restrained? We're not firing our 4-year-old. And we can take away the car from the teenager maybe more easily when it's automated, maybe not. But we're not going to throw them out of the house because they're making bad security choices. We don't do it when they do drugs. We're not going to do it when they set the router up badly. And so those things that are going to be attack spaces and attack surfaces are going to increase. It's not going to be as neat as we'd like it to and as we need it to with a modern approach.
Well, I was just going to say, as far as attack surfaces, we like to think our enterprise or our home is a castle. And in the future, everything's connected, everything's at risk. And our way of thinking about things as practitioners, not just academics, isn't going to serve us well. We have a confirmation bias that we're probably safer than we are, and I don't think that people are really aware of what the risk really is out there.
Yeah, interestingly, when you were talking about it doesn't even need to be a nation as long as they have the resources. About 15 years ago, we just did we never published it, it was just a kind of a fun study of what it would take to build a custom system to break passwords quickly. And we determined that outside of nation states, Walmart, Oprah, and Michael Jackson were the biggest threats. Luckily, none of them had a white cat and a monocle that we know of. So your comment, John, I'll follow up with. A thing that worries many of us as we go forward is not only the notion of property and boundaries. Perimeter will be perhaps a meaningless word when we start talking about cyber, but also the issue of privacy. Because there are personal bounds as well as computational or property bounds. So what do you all think about, say, 10, 15 years from now? What's going to be the state of privacy and of ownership of things that may be connected online? Oh, another thing, part of that question was most companies license their software. They don't give it to us, and they're constantly looking for ways to restrict access. So again, the idea of ownership is under change in this arena. So any comments on that mash of ideas?
Well, I've been thinking about privacy for a long time, trying to figure out what it is. And by the way, I like to distinguish between anonymity and privacy, because if you have anonymity, then you've got things disengaged from accountability. So I think ideally we'd have some accountability, but be able to shield our identities for political protest purposes or something like that. But here's what I think is the big picture, that even 10 years ago it was possible to see. I used to work at Sun Microsystems. I was there when Scott McNeely said, your privacy is gone, get over it. I think that the societal pressures are the thing that's really interesting me. I remember years ago when I had the first opportunity to, I was getting at the grocery store and I could charge my purchases against an account that would then give credit to my kids' elementary school, and they'd get a penny on a dollar or something. And of course I refused to do it because I didn't want to give up the information about what I was buying. And I got incredible trash from the people, the other parents. They said, "What's wrong with you? Why don't you want to help contribute to the school?" And I think that what we're going to see, what we're beginning to see now, this is what, if you look, I think you can see the beginnings of it now. Privacy in the traditional sense is becoming a quaint notion. And right now, people look at you a little askance if you don't want to share on Facebook, or you don't want to share what you're doing, or you don't want to put your relationships on. It's like put the pictures of of where you're going on vacation and so forth. But I really think that it won't be too long before it's actively considered antisocial not to just open everything up. And I think we're headed for a big societal clash as the people of my generation are pressed more and more to just open up the kimono and explain everything. And I see that a lot with, I have teenagers. I see that with them, they're sharing everything. So this is, I think, a real divide that's coming. I think it's not going to be the technological information is leaking all over, we know that. But I think it's the societal pressures that are going to become irresistible.
And this is coming from somebody who has a regular radio show.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So I guess on my list of things we need to get right in the next 5 to 10, well, probably less than 5 years, but at least the next 5 to 10 years if we're going to have a good next 20 years after that, does come under that heading. I like to think of the civil protections as opposed to simply privacy because it's broader. And the field of data science brings that even closer to home. So this is where cybersecurity has a huge role to play. The words that I hear around data science, not on this campus, but in most places, sound very much like the early days of cybersecurity. Deb, why would anyone want to edit that code and break it? I'm just using it. We're only going to use this for a little while. We don't need to validate it. Oh, hacker? Sneakernet? What are you talking about? So there's a design it in. We'll add it later when there's more time. I'm in a hurry now. I've got to solve this problem. It's critical. I hear that same thing over and over with data science, and the problem isn't going to be so much the cybersecurity protections as what we're doing with the data analysis and how we deal with that. So how we deal with the civil protections we give to people so that the image that they choose to present, we understand the veracity of it. We talked about the 3 V's and left out the most important 4. I'll take, or 5 if you want to keep value on it. We didn't talk about veracity. We are even security professionals here sat and listened to 3 V's and heard a 4th one added and didn't say any of us, none of us, including myself, didn't stand up and say, what about the security of all of that? We've got to change that attitude and think about what are we embedding in terms of the information about people and how we use that so that we can live in whatever the society is we want. Totally agree. If I don't put things out on Facebook for my family, it's not just that I'm perceived as not social, it means I'm not going to socialize. And there's a cost to that. So in this new world that we're developing, we need to really think about it, and we don't have that much time. I'd say within the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to be decided what we'll be able to do because the options will narrow significantly after that.
I totally agree with the other panelists, and my opinion is that technology advances much faster than our ability to ethically use it and appropriately regulate it. I think that our generation was probably skeptical about technology as it came along. I think that our children and their children are eagerly lapping it up and enjoying it. And I think that they're learning some harsh lessons as they go out into the workforce and realize that just posting everything without consideration has consequences. We might ask ourselves if we've lived through the golden age of privacy and if we're moving into an era of transparency, and that's just the way the future is going to be. But I don't know that that's true. I think that there will always be a pendulum swinging back and forth between the concerns and what's in the news and, oh, there's a new shiny that comes along that we want, and we kind of ignore the consequences until after Facebook gets on the front page. We're going to have over 9 billion people by 2050 when we look out 30 years, 30 years-ish. And I think it's going to be really difficult as everything is connected and everything potentially can leak or be hacked or be misused when it comes to big data and marketing information about us. It's going to be very difficult for the generation of 2050 to be able to feel that they're maintaining the same level of privacy that we think about when we think about keeping secrets.
Yeah, I just think that's gone, and I think I like your phrase. I think maybe we are in the golden age of privacy, but there's been this battle I've been watching for a long time between, on the one hand, people who say, why do you need to know? And people on the other side that say, what have you got to hide? Right? We've seen that tension for decades, right? And I think maybe the battle's over. I think maybe it's all on the side of what have you got to hide? What's wrong with you? And maybe it's the technology that's going to push us in that direction. But I have a feeling that the cause is lost, and that I'm going to be a dinosaur because I don't want to share all that stuff.
Can I give you a couple of short stories just to get people thinking about the future? On the one hand, if I look at developing nations, and I look at the track that we took, the path that we took to get where we are with our technology, you know, we built highways and built cars, and we installed lots of copper wire and wired up telephones. We went through decades of that development, and developing countries now are jumping to electricity and clean water and wireless and cellular, and I really think if autonomous Ubers scare you, I think we will do better when we have flying Ubers because we will be able to regulate the airspace and ensure that every vehicle that's there is autonomous and follows the appropriate standards and protocols. But I may be optimistic. I usually am. The other story is that I've got this thing that I've been thinking about for the past 18 years, and I'll just call it my AI buddy. We talk about artificial intelligence being a good thing. And so here you are as a parent in another 10 years or so, and you buy your child this AI Furby. It's predictive. It's pretty good AI. We're not talking, Turing test AI. We're just talking about something that's very responsive, connected up to the cloud. Your child bonds with it, imprints with it. It helps to teach them. It teaches them to write and spell and do math. As the child grows up, the AI becomes more sophisticated, keeping them safe, helping them learn. Eventually, the teddy bear is gone and the AI buddy is in their ear, always on their shoulder, helping answer their questions and helping them make decisions. From cradle to grave, we'll imprint with our own AI. We don't need to pass the Turing test. It just gets smarter and smarter and helps us, and we become dependent upon it. That's just a possible future. I'm not trying to sell Netflix on a was it Black Mirror episode?
Black Mirror, yeah.
But it does really, this is the kind of thing that can happen, and it has very good intentions, and it may be a great thing. But at the same time, it changes the way that society works.
I'd like to add another comment to that, a little different kind of science fiction.
Good.
So let me go back to the science fiction of telepathy. I have been very fond of that for a while, and it's interesting when you think about the modern approach to privacy. We've gotten in a mindset that says we're only going to have privacy if we mechanically enforce it. But really, privacy, at the heart of it, has to do with how we engage with each other as human beings, as a society. And so when we look at much of the literature about telepathic societies or those that have a lot of openness, it's their ability to be private and protective of one another's rights. It's how do I politely not look at your thoughts? How do I not look at you in cases you don't want to be looked at? Asimov, if you don't want to look at the telepathy, and you think about tightly knit societies. So one way to go with privacy isn't to say we're dependent entirely on machines to force us to behave well, which is not a particular future I want to live in, but instead ourselves learn how to behave well with the machines that we have. If we can change that mindset, then our interpersonal skills will be there. We still have to deal with the cyber warfare. We can't expect adversaries to be nice to us. That's a different problem. But the way we engage with each other, that's a behavioral thing we each control every single day. And so that's a privacy we can give and offer to one another even now.
To just continue on this thread, I think that by 2050, because we're trying to look out there far into the future and prognosticate, we're going to see a lot of human augmentation. I think it'll be as common as tattoos are today. I think that we'll see people, and if they don't get what they want, to be thinner and prettier and smarter and what have you, they're going to go to some back alley in some other country and get it done for a price, for enough bitcoins, right? And so I think on the one hand, even in the next 10 or 20 years, we're going to start to see human AI hybrid solutions that maximize the potential of the human brain to recognize patterns. I think as we get to 2050, we're going to see smart contact lenses. We're going to have people who are able to, when they're looking out, they can apply a skin to reality and see what they want to see. When people are looking at them, people will see them the way they want to be seen. We need to think outside the box when we're thinking about how technology might be used in the future.
So I'll add to that something that I've used as an analogy, and I'm agreeing with this kind of view, that a number of the people who've been developing the technology that we use today have been influenced by popular culture and science fiction. And so they believe that they are inventing the Star Trek future. However, that fails to take into account some of the dark uses and some of the other potential. And really, the future is probably going to be much closer to Blade Runner than it is to Star Trek. And we, as the community who work in security and privacy, should be cognizant of that and do our best to try to help shape the direction of these technologies as we go forward. So I see several people here waiting to comment.
I want to take us into the cyber defense realm because that's where I spent my life. going to tell a quick thing. Back in 2014, I was the CISO of NASDAQ, and it's not a secret. The Iranians mounted massive DDoS attacks against U.S. financial institutions that year, and we were one of the places they attacked. They were basically coming against the outward-facing websites, and they slammed us with the largest DDoS attack ever experienced. They didn't really accomplish too much in terms of disruption. A couple of the websites went down, but we had the largest stock market in the world. They didn't affect us operationally, but at the moment when they were at the most intense, the attacks were, they ramped it up again. They ramped it up, and we adjusted. And the way we adjusted was we had people watching what was going on. One of our staff said, gee, that looks funny. What are we going to do? Called the guy in another city who was marketing this. We adjusted this. We did that. And we got it all adjusted. And we raised our capacity just in time. And the reason we were able to do it was because nobody was on vacation and the right people were in at lunch. And the whole thing happened in about 7 minutes. Right? Now, by the way, the attack, that intense attack, lasted exactly 60 minutes, exactly to the second 60 minutes. And I've often suggested that what happened is that they leased the attack software for an hour, and when they didn't get what they wanted, they decided not to buy the license, but the thing was, it lasted our response was perfect within the constraints of what we designed with the staff and the communications and the software and the monitoring. 7 minutes, it was perfect. Well, that's a ludicrously long amount of time, right? And yet it was adequate for this current environment. Well, when we look at the effect of artificial intelligence on this picture, I won't go over the big diagram, but the basic idea is that when we get artificially intelligent software writing artificially intelligent software that designs attacks, right, so that the attacks are thousands of times more complex than what we can see today. And they're coming because of increased processor speed and bandwidth hundreds of times more quickly than they are today, right? So that the time frames are compressed to milliseconds and below with profoundly complex attacks. The only way that an institution is going to be able to respond to that is with a concomitant, artificially intelligent, adaptive system working in real time. So we have now two massive collections of artificial intelligence software battling it out. And of course, the perimeters are all gone, right? So I just want to point out that when that happens, which I think is 10 years out or 15 years out, I don't know quite when that happens, we're going to have to discard this idea that the attack is a result of human volition. We're going to have to stop asking questions like, why do they want to do that, or what are they after? It's going to be a matter of something like weather, right? It's going to be a bad day to run a spreadsheet, right, because of the storms on the internet. It's going to be a kind of a disease where we walk around warding off, MRSA and other infectious agents, right, because of intrinsic defenses. So the whole paradigm is going to have to shift. And the role of the human intellect in this is one of design and resource dedication. And we're not going to be we're not going to be on the battlefield, in my view, although I do agree that there may be a role for augmented human intellect, wetware, really juiced up wetware. We might still have a role to play at some point, but we're just too slow.
Yeah, no, you made the point that I was going to make much more eloquently, so I appreciate that. I think we obviously have a lot of buzzwords when we talk about AI, and marketers call you or salespeople call you and throw around machine learning and blockchain and all these technologies. But I think that they all hold a lot of promise, and I totally agree that things are going to be so fast and the volume's going to be so great, the veracity is going to be so great. We as human beings cannot do level 1 triage. We need to have AI there to help us and to deliver actionable information that we can then use. Because today, the time to detect a breach is still, according to the last Ponemon report, 191 days on average.
Deb?
I'm pondering, because I go back and forth as to whether I think the real cyber wars are going to be devastating and we'll all see it, or we won't notice it because everything will have changed out from under us. And it depends on how far out into the future and what kind of a war it is. I think that for a while you're going to see mixed mode, and I don't like to talk about the near term because that's near term. That's other people's space. But thinking into the future, some of the attacks, you're right. We're going to have pre-planned things on trips, otherwise the defenses won't be there. But there's going to be novel attacks that will come through, and there's going to be consequences of those. It's in those consequences that we're going to have to be taking the human intellect. What does it want to do about it? I also think we're going to run into some issues when we begin to attack integrity in the cyber warfare space, integrity of systems, because it's a one thing to take down an infrastructure that's visible. It's another one to quickly change everyone's bank account, change your transcripts for the students in the back room, change your clock so you're late to a meeting, change trains, reroute things so that poison comes through or disease. So there's a lot of attacks that become possible in the future. It's probably not good to speculate because I hate to think about giving anyone ideas. Deb thinks this is a good plan. Try it. She's worried about that. But that's a different kind of a cyber warfare. So we're going to need to begin categorizing what sorts of things we can and can't do. I also think that if we live in fear of the next attack, that's not going to be helpful. But if we don't live in expectation that there's going to be one, that isn't helpful either. So some thoughtful planning. Plan for the risk, then live our lives. We're going to have to do a great deal of that. I don't know. I think we may have both kinds of cyber war, the kind that take down infrastructures, our smart homes, and the kind that change little things that we don't notice. Everybody's $100 short in this room, and somebody's very much richer.
So let me expand this a little bit in thinking, because yes, we're focused on the cyber aspects. But the world at large, there are some things that are happening that we may also be able to predict will change a lot of what's going on. So for example, although there are some who deny it, climate change is real. The oceans are rising, the glaciers are melting. There are areas experiencing drought that never experienced it before. Some are predicting we may have wars over clean water. So that's happening. Climate is changing, so food production is changing. Overuse of antibiotics is resulting in a number of infections that we just don't know how to deal with anymore. That back alley surgery may be fatal for many people because there's no way to treat the infection that they'll pick up. We have those kinds of issues that we're going to have to deal with going forward, and others that are just changing our environment, some in ways that we may not be able to predict immediately. There was news this morning that the White House has suggested removing endangered species protection from 300 species. That sort of goes against the conventional wisdom we've had for a long time about preserving the genetic variation that we have in populations. So in this world of, how many billions of people did you say?
About 9.5, 9.6 billion is the projection that I recently heard.
Okay. And so that's without the next huge disease outbreak, the next flu epidemic. That's assuming that enough water and food is available for all of them, that we don't enter into a massive war and all these other kind of considerations. But in that world, with that kind of environment, is that going to change your view of where computing technology, or are there things in computing technology that will actually help us deal with those changes in a positive way?
I think we can learn from biological systems and how they fight off disease. I'm not sure that the internet protocols that are however many decades old we're basing our networks on are still serving us well. I don't know if we need to go back to ground zero, and if we don't come up with a new 2.0 better way of communicating, if we're just going to be stuck in that loop of always bolting on some new security. I do think that the track that we're on by 2050 will, have 9.5 billion people, and technology will have become invisible. It's just going to be integrated into the fabric of society, and it's just there. And people won't see it. And I think the average person will not understand technology because it is so complex and so pervasive that they essentially see it indistinguishable from magic, if you get that reference.
So in 2050, are the majority still going to be using IP version 4?
Windows 26.
Windows 26. Either of you have some comments to add to this?
If I may, so in addition to, conjuring up this complex system of warring artificial intellects, here's the big picture for me, I think, in the next, say, 30 years. And by the way, I want to recommend a couple of things people are interested in this. You should study the work of Ray Kurzweil, great futurist, and he's doing a lot of work on life extension. He's a little older than I am. His goal, he wrote a book, he says, live long enough to live forever. So he's a member of the life extension force, which I know some folks in there. I think what we're going to see is this, that there's going to be a tremendous worldwide societal conflict between, on the one hand, the hyper-technical folks who are part of the technological elite and are working in say, life extension, artificial intelligence, and exploitation of the world's resources, and a neo-Luddite movement here's what the bottom line is. I think that as the life extension movement and artificial intelligence gains ground and we begin to modify what it means to be human, we modify the human genome and we modify ourselves and develop artificially intelligent beings and hybrids, I think there's going to be a massive global reaction to that. And I think that we have never seen a culture war, the likes of this, where they're on the one hand, people who are modifying themselves and their bodies and their genomes, modifying their DNA and creating new organs and things. And on the other hand, there will be people who, and you can think of them as fundamentalists if you want to label, but there are going to be people who object in the strongest possible, most violent way to this kind of basic modification of humankind. And that, I think, is going to, and I don't know whether it's 20 years off or 25 years off, but it is a massive conflict.
I was going to say, if you read Frank Herbert's Dune,
Yeah.
the idea of the Butlerian jihad that made any use of AI a capital offense
Yeah.
As a reaction to precisely the kind of thing you're talking about.
And that's where I think it's going, and I don't know if anything can stop it. But I think we're going to have to face that as a species. What does it mean to be human? Who gets to decide?
Well, I think that what exacerbates that is if automation displaces the workers at the bottom and increases the digital divide between the haves and the have-nots, that's only going to fuel what you're talking about.
Well, and the last one, just last reference, and I'll stop for a bit. But I just want to refer to people, if you haven't studied it, the anthropic principle and the so-called great filter, the idea that in fact technology may, in its very seeds, carry the thing that's going to destroy us or limit us. And so it may in fact be self-limiting, this process of technological exploitation.
So if you haven't seen this before, this is one of the theories behind why we haven't detected intelligent life on any other planet, is that there's something inherent in the technological progression of a species that causes it to exterminate itself, which is a cheery thought. But moving past that, Deb, you indicated you wanted to say something. So.
Yeah, I guess, so I won't argue with anything put forward. I've run different sorts of scenarios, and I've seen both utopian and dystopian predictions from people. And so I'll just share a life lesson from personal life lesson. So what I've learned in facing a number of really interesting challenges, from death of a spouse to cancer to 12.5-ton tree dropping on my house, for goodness sakes, at the beginning of last month, and a tornado here. It's just been an interesting time period. But what you need to do is to prepare for those things that you can predict that may happen that are bad. I mean, we all know that. That's one reason I think the cybersecurity mission is so important, because we're preparing defenses against things we can predict. But if you spend all of your time worrying about that, you bring about the very future you're afraid of. So what you have to do, and I will go out doing this if it's a dystopia, is to do my very best to be as positive and as resilient as possible in the face of whatever the threat is that comes. And I will protect those that I need to protect, which at the moment includes the nation. And so for those of you who are going into cybersecurity, I ask you also to think about this. This is a field where you hold other people's lives, livelihoods, happiness, ability to use a Furby, whatever you want to think about in your hands. It's important to somebody. So think about the worst case. Plan for that. Be scrupulous. But don't let it make you feel too much risk and fear to move forward, because if we do carry the seeds of our destruction, let's go out like a wildfire. Let's do it right.
So I'm going to ask one more question, and then if you have some things that you want to pose, line up there at the microphones. But the question I wanted to ask is related to my own experience. So 20 years ago, started CERIAS. I was out giving talks various places. And the observation I made here about CERIAS, one of our major supporters was Sun Microsystems. We probably would not have succeeded without the incredible support that Sun gave us in equipment, personnel, hiring, a lot of other things that went on there. Sun is no more. At the time we were formed, Digital Equipment Corporation, major company. Everybody had a VAX in the 1980s. And then digital, gone. Data General, gone. Xerox used to make one of the best mainframes on the market back in the 70s and invented the workstation. Xerox PARC is gone. You know, they're now just working with copiers. As we sort of look forward, and that was just 20 years ago. So 20 years ago, when I was out giving talks, I described some of these and said, it's entirely possible in 20 years, I may have gotten the time frame wrong, Microsoft will cease to exist. And people thought that was ludicrous, of course, but Microsoft has had some setbacks. They're not the 800-pound gorilla they used to be. And there are a number of companies now. Facebook is looking at this big decline with regulation. They may have to reorganize their business structure. This is not so much a specific question, but generally, as we sort of look at the current landscape, what can we say about the nature of businesses and market segments that we suspect are going to either disappear or grow larger over the next 2 decades? Why don't I start with you, Deb? Do you want to?
So disruption is really hard, I would say. And while I don't want to predict particular companies or market spaces, I think there's some characteristics you can look for when you're thinking through who might be able to weather or not. I know disruption is hard because it's easy for me to get incremental technology into other organizations. It is really hard if I'm asking them to take disruptive technology. Everyone says they want it, and you know when you give it to them, they say, it's disruptive. Because if it's disruptive, it usually means you have to change your business practices, you have to change your training, you have to change where people sit. And so it's much harder for the larger, more established to make changes. So the ones that I think we'll see be successful are the ones that crack that nut of how do they make themselves able to deal with internal disruption, and then which are the ones that are able to give the disruption to the rest of us. Because there's a difference in being disruption and providing disruption in a positive sense.
Gentlemen?
Many years ago, I was the VP of MIS, Management Information Systems, at a big bank, and I was in Orange County, California. And my computer room made the news. I was in the papers because we were the first commercial organization in the world to have a gigabyte of storage. And it had, you know, it was a room about this size. And everywhere where there's somebody sitting, there was a disk drive. It was a gigabyte of storage. We were famous. And I was looking over my fiefdom the morning we had the press in, and I realized that while I've been thinking about all the disk drives, the computers, you know, my background was in computers, technology. I used to think of computers was the central point. And then I was looking at this room full of disk drives, and I said, the disk drives or the peripherals are really what's important. And then I stopped, and I finally realized it wasn't the computers, it wasn't the CPUs, it wasn't the disk drives, it was the data. Right? It was the information. And I think that, you know, all this other stuff goes away. There's a wonderful science fiction story about the fellow who finds a way to store all the information in the world and in the planets, and he does it by notching atoms, right? And they fill up all that space too, right? And they fill the universe with notched atoms with data on it. The companies that will survive are the ones that find a way to be profitable manipulating data, interpreting and understanding and serving data, because that's really what it comes down to. It's not the transmission of it, it's not necessarily the storage of it, it's the understanding of it, it's the protection of it, it's the interpretation and the serving of it. that is the thing that I think will abide.
Be optimistic. I think that's what Mark Weatherford started off the conference with, right? So he's still an optimist. I think the vendor hamster wheel will have to change. You know, you have a lot of innovation. Some of that innovation is successful. They consolidate, get bought by larger companies, and so on. And that you know, from inception to adoption by the laggards is a long process. And we need to get that shorter because the adversaries out there are going to optimize and shorten that. And they're going to be hitting us with attacks that we can't defend against. It's kind of like moving to the cloud. When you move to the cloud motivates you to have a good patch cycle, not to go out to the business and say, hey, we want to patch your system. Oh, we don't have the resources. That'll take us down. We can't do that. We'll do it next year. If you're at AWS, it's just going to get patched. And so we need to get that response time and that cycle down.
Question?
Yes, Warren Simonson, Rockwell Automation. I really appreciated Deborah's attitude. I've been to a number of forums recently, and there is a large amount of woe is us, the industry's in a state of problems, we have all these things that we don't know how to deal with. And I really think the attitude of staying positive and remaining agile is the right answer to that. But my question that I would like to ask the futurists is based on a personal experience I had. I recently bought a car, and so I had great fun. We were out shopping all these different vendors, and I had great fun as a security person asking all of them, what is your company doing about cybersecurity? Not one of them even knew what I was talking about, much less had an answer. There was no prepared answer to that. My question to the futurists is, we constantly talk about the need to educate the general public about hygiene, all these different things. How do we do this without the fear-mongering of the media, you know, oh, the world's going to fall down if you don't do this stuff? How do we, because I think that creates an attention, but then eventually people just can't deal with that. They can't live that way anymore. What can we, in your mind, are there things that can be done to positively attract people to do the right things?
Now, it's harder, and it requires us to have more buying power as consumers. But consumer pressure to make security a sales point is important. So the fact that you asked about that question means they're going to have to think about it. The challenge we have is there's often no good option. So if you have two cars that you're looking at and neither one has any decent security, what are you going to do? You maybe turn your Bluetooth off. And I'll tell you, I had a large bit of trouble myself trying to buy an HVAC system for my house after the tree fell. Nobody knows what kind of security is on the HVAC. It's pretty much Bluetooth and open. So we do, I think, need the Ralph Naders of the world to step up and help us out. There we go. With declaring that security is important, explaining to the consumer why they want it, and at least putting a little circle on a product that says good housekeeping seal. Little things like that can make a difference. But we used to say once people understood what security empowered and enabled, that we would make it a better selling point long term. Not in terms of the national security, that's different, but security actually empowers. If you trust that car more, you're more apt to be able to turn over the wheel to it. So you are more empowered as a driver, owner of a driverless vehicle, if you can trust it more. Security empowers trust at its very best. Intrinsic security is a more positive, more collaborative world. We don't tend to think about it that way because we often don't have the option. But that, if I could have my way, is the magic wand I'd wave and add that to the dialogue.
I think if we ever want to have autonomous vehicles, we have to have trust, right? And so I think trust is very important. And when it comes to security and privacy, I was in the corporate world for a long time. I negotiated a lot of contracts. And it's the leverage that a Fortune 500 company has is pretty significant. You can say, hey, I think you're not, we need more than what you're giving us. The pressure from those customers to push the vendors, the Microsofts and so on, to incorporate just a little bit more security so that we have two factors, so that we have, whatever it is that's necessary. That kind of back pressure is very important.
I was the security rep for Sun Microsystems in its heyday, and I gave a speech once, and at the microphone somebody said to me, when are you guys going to stop shipping that crap?
That's not
You
very
may have
specific.
been there. And,
I may have said it.
and I said, I can't be sure, but I'll tell you this, it'll be shortly after you all stop buying it. Gene mentioned yesterday of the tragedy of the Commons, and this is a seminal article written in the 60s by a fellow named Garrett Hardin, if you want to look it up. But basically, I've given up, after struggling with it for many years, I've given up waiting for people who make things to spontaneously decide, because of commercial marketing pressures, that they want to make things more secure. This is particularly as it relates to cars, but also computer systems and software. This is actually, I've come around to the idea, this is a moment when the federal government in the U.S., other governments outside, can step in, and just like the situation with seat belts, right, they can step in and institute seat belt requirements so that people need to make secure systems, and then the competitive reason not to do that goes away. Seat belts, General Motors and others complained that it was going to raise the cost of the car $50, and they would make them non-competitive. The Fed stepped in and made everybody do it, and then the competitive war went away. So I think that the answer to the question is that it's going to require regulation, to require people to make good security quality products. And by the way I think that happens is, I'm afraid to say, a catastrophe, which we could all spin out of control here, but we could fantasize. But I think it'll be some awful thing that happens, that some then 23-year-old assistant in a congressman assistant will then write some regulation real quick, and they'll jam it in. So that's what I think.
To disagree just a little bit, I would hope that we can have a more, I agree that that's a possibility, and it'll probably happen in some areas. I would hope that groups like CERIAS here, all the educated people, the students who are getting educated, will come up with innovative ideas to deal with problems, and that will help us. And I think that rather than waiting for what has often happened, which is wait for that disaster.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we've got 2 more questions, and then we'll do a close. At the back microphone first.
Okay, so in response to the terrifying prospect of an AI Furby and the augmentation you spoke of, I think, from a security perspective, there are a lot of security professionals who are really good about thinking about the bad, right? Good people who think about the bad and that pessimism. And Deb, I appreciate your comment about not just focusing on the pessimism, but how do we move it forward? From an augmentation perspective, I don't know if any of you watched the show Black Mirror, but the psychosocial, sociological impact of if you're wearing those smart contacts and someone hacks them and changes what you're seeing to the point that you make, potentially a fatal decision, those have really big implications. So, not that expertise is in this room, but there are people who think about that stuff. So where do you think security professionals play a role in starting those conversations with the right people to sort of play out those scenarios to inform better design or better policy around technology that's going to emerge in the next 15, 20 years that is around augmentation?
I guess I'll answer that this way. That potentiality of blinding is possible now. You can do it with data science. If you take a look at the emerging field of adversarial use of machine learning, it's possible to make a school bus look like a panda if you can get at the data. So you can, in fact, change what people see. I might change it so you can change what a plane sees or what a car sees with a little bit of tape. So we have the problem with us now. And the reason I raised data science as one of my deep concerns is I'm just not seeing the thoroughness in most places added to the discussion of how do we use machine learning and pull out those biases that might affect the civil liberties, but also those things that enable bad data or bad training data to be used in that regard. So I'd say we right now have a responsibility both to educate our colleagues who are in data science and then also to go into those professions and make sure those products that we see and talk about, that people are aware that that's a possibility.
We'll go to the next question.
Yes, I'm Fred Scholl. I'm based in Nashville. I was in a parking garage last week, and I found that the gate wouldn't go up. So nobody in the garage could get out, and half the people were kind of stuck there. So I was kind of surprised. Look at this small glitch and what a huge impact it had. So I'm wondering if the panelists feel that we're going into a golden age of system availability with cloud and virtualization and containers, or are we creating a potential disaster with Agile and DevOps or neither?
Well, if we project out far enough, I think we're going to have a real glut of devices connected to our networks, and providing availability for everybody's everything is going to be a real challenge. The solution to your problem is you need a loop of copper and toss it on the other side, and then it'll go up. But anyhow.
I was going to say we need a technological MacGyver, a little bit more of that, but we do tend to design systems right now so that if everything works, everything's beautiful, but if nobody works, there's no one in the parking garage, and your cell phone won't activate. So we still need to have cyber-physical. Doesn't mean only cyber-physical. It should mean that there is, in fact, a physical backup in most of these areas, and I don't think we can ever get away from that.
You know, I just want to, I guess I've been the naysayer of the group. I just want to conclude and respond to that by saying, I think we're in the golden age of information security. I think this is it because we are close enough to the roots of the technology that as individuals we can really still make a difference. And the reason I went into computers all those many years ago was because I wanted to have a chance to influence some of these societal factors. And I want to tell anybody who's considering whether or not this is the right field, this is a marvelous opportunity to get in there and be in the room when some of these decisions are being made. Somebody's going to be deciding whether or not to make autonomous agents that can decide whether or not to use their weapons. You know, somebody's going to make these decisions. And why not be in the room and be part of those things? It's a tremendous privilege to have an influence on these decisions. And I think we can be very proud as a group for what we've done in terms of ethics so far, and I think we really should be excited about the chance to influence some of these outcomes.
So last question, short answer for each of you. I believe, from what I know of each of you, that you've done your share of reading of science fiction or similar. Name a book or a movie that you think would be most valuable for some of the students to look at to get an idea of future, if you can come up with one on such short notice. So who'd like to answer first?
I have a quick one. It's not very complicated. It's very recent. Episode 7 of the X-Files from this season. It was kind of a fun look, and it's you can get to it on Fox.com for free. They took a look at technology gone awry. It's a standalone episode. It's fun, and it talks about what might happen in the future.
So I'm a fan of Bruner and Halperin for this kind of thing. Halperin, Truth Machine, and Bruner, Shockwave Writer. Never get too old to read. Take a look at E.E. Doc Smith if you want a really old look at technology. But think about it in terms of the modern day, and I think you'll get what I mean.
And I always recommend one particular movie that was made in the 70s, and they're remaking it. But I think this is a must-see for everybody, and it's called Colossus, the Forbin Project. Eric Braeden, they're remaking it, so that I think they're not using main times anymore. But it shows, it is a dystopian film, but it addresses the idea of having autonomous intelligent agents in charge of defense and attack, and I think it's very informative. It certainly changed. I saw it 40 years ago or more. It really affected my life.
Yeah. And I would add, perhaps, I would certainly agree with some of these that I would recommend them, but I think another one is see the movie Forbidden Planet.
Oh, yeah.
With what happens when we take technology too far and can't control it. With that, I think we're here at the end. We could obviously go for many years more, and probably will. I would encourage you, especially the students in the room, that as you go forward and you design things, don't focus on what's due tomorrow, although you need to do that for your jobs or your homework or whatever else. But as professionals, if you're going to be in this realm, you're going to live in the future, think about what future you want to live in. And as you make your choices for things you work on, the decisions you make on what you build, even the decisions you make on the jobs that you take and the things that you buy, all of the panel have basically said, think to the future, have certain optimism, be aware of what could go wrong, but you are the agents of change. You are the ones who are going to be making the future that the rest of us are going to live in. And your choices are the ones that are going to make a difference. So that's an experience we've all had. I hope you got that from our talk, and thank you very much for listening to us.